Hello and welcome back. In this video, I will be building a wall-mounted cubby. This started off as a design. I put this together in FreeCAD to make sure I came up with a design that would work. Once everything looked good, I disassembled the design and flattened it to gauge the amount of plywood I would need and how I would cut the plywood. One cubby will require 2 full sheets of plywood to complete. I asked to get my 4x8 feet sheets of plywood to be cut into 2 pieces, one 26-inch and the other 22-inch. I borrowed my parents' minivan to carry the plywood home. Now I begin cutting the plywood down to size. I rough cut them oversized first before trimming the edges down to the exact size. This is all done by rip cutting on the table saw. This is a 26-inch piece that I cut into 2 13-inch pieces, which will be the top and bottom of the cubby. This is a 22-inch piece that I cut into 2 11-inch pieces, which will be the top and bottom back sections. This is a 26-inch piece that I cut into 14 and 12-inch pieces. The 14-inch piece will be the 2 sides of the cubby, and the 12-inch piece will not be used. This is a 22-inch piece that I cut into 15 and 7-inch pieces. The 15-inch piece will be the cubby dividers, and the 7-inch piece will be the center back section. Here I measure and cut out the 7 cubby dividers. As I'm starting off with a 15-inch by 8 feet long board, at least the first few cuts are too unwieldy to be done on the table saw. So I use a circular saw for these cuts. I oversize the cut by ½ an inch to leave some room so that I can trim the edges later on the table saw. Now I cut out the 2 sides. Again, I have the same issue that the board is too long for me to be able to safely cut this on the table saw. Now I set the table saw fence to 12.5 inches and trim one side of the cubby dividers. I also trim one side of the top and bottom, as the top and bottom will be flush with the cubby dividers, so I cut them at the same time. Now I set the table saw fence to the 12 inches of the final dimension for the depth of the cubby, and trim the other side of the cubby dividers. I also trimmed the top and bottom. The top and bottom are now cut down to the final size. Now I set the table saw fence to 14.75 inches and trim one side of the cubby dividers. Now I set the table saw fence to 14.5 inches and trim the other side of the cubby dividers. This is the final dimension for the height of the cubby. The cubby dividers are now done. Now I set the table saw to a 45-degree angle so that I can start cutting the French cleats into the back sections. I set the table saw fence to around 10 inches to cut the top and bottom back sections first. Now I set the table saw fence to 6 inches and cut the center back section. I cut the other side by moving the fence onto the other side of the blade. This is so that the previously cut edge won't slide underneath the fence when I make this cut, which would happen if I were to try to make this cut on the original side that I was making all the cuts on. Now I put all 3 back sections together to see how they fit and whether I need to make any adjustments. The height came out to 25 inches, which is 2 inches more than the design. I take 2 inches off of the bottom section. Now I CNC cut out the side pieces. As there's not enough space around the edges for me to clamp the piece down to, I'm having to move the clamps out of the way as the cutter comes around, and then move them back into place after the cutter passes through. This is a little bit dangerous, and I'm doing this only because the cutter is cutting at a very slow speed. This video has it sped up by 8 times, because we have better things to do than to watch this slowly get cut. I take this opportunity to CNC in my logo. Now I'm ready to assemble the cubby. I measure out the locations of the 7 cubby dividers and mark their locations. I slide in the first cubby divider and secure it using clamps. These clamps will serve as references. Now I pre-drill in the screw holes. I slide out the divider and apply glue. I slide it back in and drive in the screws. I assembled the second cubby divider the same way. Here it is from a different angle. I square up the divider before drilling in the screw holes. This is something I forgot to do on the first divider. I repeat this process for the next 5 dividers. Here I show how the pieces squeeze together as I drive the screws in, squeezing out the glue. I vacuum the wood dust before flipping the cubby over. Now I assemble the top. I measure the cubbies to make sure they are lining up square. I use clamps to adjust any of the dividers that need some adjustments. I pre-drill the screw holes. I removed the top so that I can apply glue to the dividers. I put the top back on and drive the screws in. Now I widened the screw holes a little with a 3/8 inch drill bit. I cut out some plugs from a 3/8 inch dowel. I will use these to cover up the screw heads. Now I apply glue to the plugs and hammer them into the holes. Now I saw off the protrusions with a flush cut saw. I use a chisel to clean up anything left behind by the flush cut saw. Now I do the same thing on the bottom. Now it's time to round all the edges. I set up my router with this round over bit. I adjust the level. Now I round over the edges on the two sides of the cubby. I am skipping the side that is going to be facing the wall. I round over both faces of each side and both sides of the cubby. Now I round over the outward facing face of the cubby. Now I cut off the protrusions from the plugs on the bottom. I do this now because I've been waiting for the glue to dry. I use a chisel to clean things up. Finally, I sand the plug so that it is absolutely flush with the surrounding wood. I also sand away the pencil marks. Now it's time to assemble the back sections. I arranged the back sections onto the cubby and marked the locations of the screw holes for the top back section. I pre-drill in the screw holes. Now I apply glue to the joints. Now I drive the screws in. Now I flip the cubby over and do the same thing for the bottom back section. Assembling the sides is a bit tricky as there's no good surfaces on which to rest them. I end up securing them using these clamps and this square on both the top and bottom. Now I pre-drill the screw holes. I'm sorry I couldn't get a clear shot as the cubby is so big and heavy at this point. I had a limited number of options with how I could position it. This is what the screw holes on the sides look like. I apply glue to the joints. Now I attach the side and drive the screws in. I do the same on the other side, which I don't show here. And this is the finished cubby. It all came together very nicely. This may be one of my best works so far. Finally, this is how it looks, mounted to the wall and painted. I think it looks almost identical to the original design. And that concludes this project. Thanks for watching this video.